In this episode, we talk about how to become your best self. Get excited because this is Tiny Leaps, Big Change. Welcome to another episode of Tiny Leaps, Big Changes, where I share simple strategies you can use to get more out of your life. My name is Greg Clunis, and in this episode, we are looking at a topic that I know a lot of people maybe aren't directly asking, but it's sort of the sub-question, the question that we all sort of want to know. In this journey of personal development, we're all ultimately trying to understand how do we become the best version of ourselves, whether it's around our focus or our goals or our fitness or our nutrition or our finances or whatever it might be, whatever area we are focused on. It always comes back to that core question of how do we become better versions of us? How do we improve on us? And that is, I think, an important question to answer. So what I want to do in this episode is lay out what I think are the three most important pieces of that process, because it is possible to create a better you. It is possible to become a better you. And there are, in my opinion, three things that can help you with that more than maybe some others. So we're going to focus in on that. We're going to look at those three things and have that discussion. Now, before we jump into this episode, let's look at today's sponsor. Here's a fun fact. Lion's mane mushrooms have long been used by Buddhist monks to help with focus during meditation. Well, the team over at Four Sigmatic had the brilliant idea to take these mushrooms and combine them with 100% organic Arabica coffee beans. It has 0 sugar, 0 carbs, and 0 calories. It's organic, vegan, paleo, sugar-free, and dairy-free. And the absolute best part, it leaves you feeling awesome. Seriously, I've had this coffee basically every day since I've gotten it. It's become a critical part of my afternoon coffee routine, and it leaves you feeling natural. There's this like buzz that comes from it that doesn't feel like it's overbearing or too much the way that regular coffee does. It's just this like natural, focused, in control energy. And it even comes in these really easy to use packets that you can bring with you anywhere. Just heat up some water, rip open a packet, pour, mix, and you're good to go. Now, of course, we have a special offer just for Tiny Leaps Big Changes listeners. Receive 15% off your Four Sigmatic order. Just head over to foursigmatic.com/tinyleaps or enter the code TINYLEAPS at checkout. That's Four Sigmatic, FOURSIGMATIC.com. foursigmatic.com/tinyleaps to receive 15% off your order. Okay, so the first thing that you want to look at when you're trying to become a better version of you, when you're trying to be your best self, the first thing you want to look at are your standards. Now, I've done an episode on this in the past called Raise Your Standards. It's based on a Tony Robbins quote. I believe it was originally his quote. It may not have been, but that's the first place that I heard it. And it's this idea that by raising your standards, raising what you are willing to accept in your life, you are ultimately going to also raise your actions. You're going to have to, right? You're going to have to raise your behavior, raise your actions, raise the things you are willing and unwilling to do. Because if your standards truly have raised, if you truly are unwilling to accept certain things and are only willing to accept other things, then in order to gain those things, you will have to change your action. You will have to change your behavior. In order to improve the quality of your life, you will have to change your behavior and the things that you engage with, the things that you're willing to tolerate. So simply by looking at your life, looking at the things you've accepted in the past, things that you are currently accepting, things that you have historically been okay with, and deciding, you know what, these things I'm no longer willing to accept. I'm no longer willing to let into my life. I'm no longer willing to say yes to. You'd accomplish two things. One, you take ownership. You recognize your role in creating that reality that you currently live. You recognize your role in accepting things into your life. in saying yes to things, even if it feels like, oh, it's just thrown on me. I have no choice, right? Life doesn't happen to you. You live life. Life is you. You are life. That's a much more grammatically correct way of saying it. Life doesn't happen to you. You make choices, and that creates your life. And that includes everything that you've accepted into your life because you have accepted it. Now, maybe you didn't have complete control over it. Maybe there are things that are outside of your control. And I understand that. These things exist. These are real concerns. But at some point, you have to say yes. At some point, you have to be willing to either accept it or to continue accepting it. Maybe you're saying yes because the consequences of saying no are far worse. That's a possibility. But you're still saying yes, and that is something that I think a lot of us don't recognize. We think that the things that we have in our lives, the lives that we live, are just sort of, they just happened, right? We just woke up one day and this was the life we had. Oh, well, nothing we can do about it. No, the choices we made along the way are what created that. The things we said yes to along the way are what created that. The things we continue to say yes to are what will create the life we live going forward. So that life can be the same we have today, or it can be different based on what we choose to say yes to, based on the standards we have. So that's the first big piece of advice, is to raise your standards. Look at the things you say yes to right now, the things you let into your life right now, and truly ask yourself, is this what you want? Is this what you want to allow into your space? Some of it will be, and others, it's time to change. Now, the second thing I recommend is to analyze your mindset. Now, what do I mean by this? Changing your mindset, changing the way that you view the world is incredibly difficult. And a big part of why is because it is invisible. And it's not something that we're always aware of. We don't fully understand our views on different career types, or our views on things we've done in the past that maybe we failed at, or our views on how our bodies should look versus what we want them to look like. We don't fully understand the subconscious beliefs that we hold on to around all the different areas of our lives. And so it's difficult to change that because we can't see them. We just live our lives. We just exist in that conscious surface realm, make decisions based on what we think are perfectly logical series of events, and we end up with the life that we have. But sometimes those decisions come from the subconscious. Sometimes they're far more emotional than we realize. And by starting to look at those mindsets, look at the beliefs that we hold, look at the identity that we hold on to, by starting to recognize those things, we start to have influence over them. And so this is why I say analyze your mindset rather than change your mindset, because changing is difficult without analysis. Change isn't where you start. You start with getting an understanding of. You start with bringing it to the surface. You start with even just recognizing that it exists, that it's a thing that you need to be looking at. So one easy way to get started with this is to pick whatever area of your life you're most interested in improving right now. Let's say, for argument's sake, that is your relationships. Pick that one area and start paying attention, asking yourself that question: what are my beliefs about this? If it's a romantic relationship, you get into a fight, maybe you're aside for a moment, you're separated for a moment so that you can calm down. Ask yourself, what are my beliefs right now? What do I believe about this situation? What do I believe about this relationship? What do I believe? What am I holding on to? Where is that coming from? You're not going to have the answers. But these are the types of questions that a therapist might ask you. These are the types of questions that anyone who is prompting you to dive deeper into your subconscious mind might ask you. And so it's important and valuable to start asking them for yourself. Start analyzing, start collecting data on what it is you believe, where those beliefs came from, what those beliefs are affecting in the rest of your life. Start understanding it, and then you'll be able to start influencing it. You'll be able to start choosing different choices and correcting yourself if you find yourself falling into a thought pattern that you have historically fallen down and maybe you don't like so much. And then the third big thing, and I think this one is valuable for the other two as well. Because quite frankly, if this is the only thing you do, I think it could be the most valuable out of the three. And that is to continue gaining new perspectives. This is something I've talked about in the past. Most of us grow up and we are in a constant state of learning. Through early childhood, we're learning about the world, we're learning about our family, we're learning about ourselves, we're learning about what's right and what's wrong. And then we get into school and we're learning more advanced things about the world. We're learning mathematics and we're learning language and we're learning how to write and read, and we're learning how to socialize with people. But then at some point, school ends. Maybe we go to college, maybe we go to a PhD program, but at some point, school stops. And then for many of us, we stop learning. We stop experiencing new things. We stop gaining new perspective. And that version of us becomes cemented. And that's not okay if our goal is to become the best version of ourselves. Think about it. It doesn't make any sense at all. If you are exactly who you were 10 years ago when you first graduated college, you haven't gained any new perspectives, you haven't learned anything new about the world or your place in it, it's going to be really hard to become a better version of yourself. It's going to be really difficult. So your job, whether you're in school right now or not, is to develop the habit of constantly learning, constantly gaining new perspective, constantly trying to understand the things that you don't understand. Become curious about the world that you live in. Become curious about yourself. Become curious about the people around you. Gaining new perspectives, gaining new understanding is, in my opinion, one of the easiest and fastest ways to improve yourself and your life. Because by gaining those perspectives, you start to think about your life differently. Maybe you're more grateful for the things you have after you've gone on a trip to a country that has less. Maybe you better understand how far you can go after you meet somebody who has had a similar history to you and gone much further in their career. Maybe you meet the love of your life and they change the way you think about how to live on a day-to-day basis. But you can never know those things unless you're willing to gain new perspectives. And there are many ways to gain new perspectives. You can travel, you can read, you can watch videos, you can consume content. You can do any number of things as long as you are willing to approach it with this understanding of, I want to gain a new perspective. I'm looking for something from this. I've gained new perspectives from video games, from watching anime, from watching movies. I've gained new perspectives from any number of things purely because I'm approaching that thing with a curious mind, with an understanding that, hey, there are real people who created this thing. And they created it from their perspective. And those perspectives are woven throughout the final product. And so if you look, you can see their perspective. You can see how they view the world. And that's a skill that I actually learned in college. I was an art major, and my animation professor sat us down and made us watch animated films purely from a critical eye, from the point of view of what can I pull from this rather than from an entertainment point of view. And so now it's something that I do in my day-to-day life, and that allows me to constantly find and gain new perspectives that eventually affect my art and affect the things I'm creating and affect the way that I engage with people and affect the advice that I give and affect the way that I live my life. So those are my 3 pieces of advice for those of you trying to improve your life, trying to be better today than you were yesterday. The first thing is to raise your standards for what you're willing to accept in your life. The second is to analyze your mindset and start to understand some of those subconscious beliefs that are driving your behaviors. And the third is to be willing and able to constantly pursue new perspectives and constantly try to learn something new. I hope this was helpful to you. If it was, do me a favor, click subscribe. And listen, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts right now or any podcast app, we could really use your help. Please consider leaving a 5-star review. It would mean the world to me. It would help us so much with getting the word out there about the podcast. Again, if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast, consider leaving a 5-star review. and just be honest with your thoughts. I would love to hear from you. I would love to have that review, and I'd love to be able to share this message with more people who need to hear it. Now, with all of that said, I've been Greg Clunis, and remember that all big changes come from the tiny leaps you take every day.